Okay, the red light is on. That means we're recording.
Wonderful,
And
wonderful.
hopefully we're recording sound and video.
Okay, and is this our first excursion into this thing?
This is
Jim?
our first, well, this is our test
Our test, okay.
of our first excursion into this
Okay.
thing.
This is our trial of a test of the
It's a
first
trial of
excursion.
a test of an
First
error.
excursion.
But yeah, we want to try and do the interview to make sure we've got microphones that are going to pick up the interviewee.
Okay. Well, Joe, would you
the
say something for the
interviewers.
camera as a test?
Good morning. How are you?
Speak
How
again.
did I do?
It's not really
Hello,
picking up.
Hannibal.
We want to see that little green light go when Joe
Oh, I see.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Well, now it's going.
It's going okay, ain't it?
Okay. All
How
right.
you doing?
Hello,
Yeah.
Joey.
speaks. It's going to pick us up.
Hello?
Hi there. Is
All
this
right,
on?
all right. Okay.
So,
What do we do?
so you know, he's going to sound like we're at the drive-up window at Wendy's, which
That's
is
fine. That's fine. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
All
Are we
you have
good
to
to
do
go?
is say, "May I help you?"
May I help you?
You want fries with that?
Yeah. So what we're going to do,
me
Joe, is
supersize
we're
that?
going to do this every week. We're going to just sit and talk about things that are going on, promote things that are coming up, and talk to the people who make those things happen. You're one of the people that makes those things happen, obviously, with your very fine restaurant in Hannibal. It's been around for how long?
44 years.
44 years, and you've been part of it, almost all of it.
Yes.
So you
I
basically
started
grew
when
up
I was
there?
16, yes.
All right. And now you are the owner-operator, and menu hasn't changed much, has it?
No, not much. I've added a few things and took a few things away, you know. Everybody says, how come you don't change your menu? And I said, well, I have a lot of tourists, so it's their first time they've ever eaten there.
Well, I'd like to interject here. And first, I think we need to let people know that Joe's restaurant is the old Planters restaurant. It's right down here on Main Street in Hannibal, Missouri, where
Right.
we're broadcasting from today.
Yep.
And Joe's just moving his family down there. Has been. He's renovated the upstairs of it. Now, something, Jim, I don't know you're aware of, but Joe had an instance where he had to call the police several years ago.
Yes,
Joe?
I did. I was doing a catering that weekend, and I had the door open, and a man had gone upstairs and found a place to sleep. And I was walking up the steps carrying catering equipment, and I heard like somebody was talking on the phone because they were talking and pausing and talking and pausing. Well, I went up a little further and I saw this naked man laying there on the floor.
And by the way, I should interject
Interject.
that in Hannibal, naked means no clothes.
That's true.
One of my favorite Randy Newman songs, "Beware of the Naked Man."
That's right. And so while he would talk, I went down the steps. He'd stop talking, I would stop. And then he'd talk again, and I'd go down the steps. And then by the time I got to the bottom of the steps, I figured out he was actually talking to Jesus. And I was like, oh my God. So,
Okay.
yes. So I called the police, and that was funny too. Mr. Zavonia comes, and I said, well, there's a man up there, and he's not supposed to be up there, and he's naked. He goes, he's what? I said, he's naked. And he goes, okay. So he grabs his taser and goes upstairs. And I went up there with him, and he leans over to him, and he says, what are you doing up here, and why the hell are you naked?
And the answer was,
He says, because it's hot.
okay, so just one of the many tourism adventures awaiting you
Oh,
here.
yeah.
in
That's right, that's
Hannibal.
right.
That's right.
And you know, the place where this all occurred, it's right over Old Planters Restaurant, and
Yeah.
Joe has now renovated that and moved his family in there, and it's a beautiful spot. You've got a river view there of the Mississippi River,
Yes,
don't
I
you?
do. I sure
right
do.
across the levee. I mean, the Mississippi River is
Oh,
right
yeah.
across the levee
Yeah,
from
yeah.
where Joe lives. Yeah.
Lots of that kind of renovation going on downtown. A lot of people
it.
moving into
Yeah,
the
a lot of
downtown
people.
area.
Downtown is becoming more alive all the time.
Yeah.
And not just people living, but also people making these apartments available for
Yeah.
rentals and for
Yeah.
visitors,
We're
hotels.
fortunate in the fact that we live in a community that's about 17,000, but it's getting better. We're actually seeing progress year after year. Now, you were already working down here when they put the levee in back in
Yes.
'93, right?
Yes.
And before then, nobody would put a cent in these buildings because they
No.
flooded twice a year.
Right.
But now we're becoming a thriving community. Well, that's not the only interesting story. You know, Joe, I remember you recounting an incident when you were on vacation with your wife and staying in a bed and breakfast at the Vicksburg
yeah.
battlefield. I'd like you
Yeah.
to recount that one.
Oh, that's quite interesting. We came in late, so the guy says, "Well, I'll give you the tour in the morning after breakfast." And we're like, "Oh, okay, that's been great, you know." And so I went to sleep, and my wife tells me that I got up and I walked to the front door and I opened it, and then I walked over to where a lamp was across the room, and I took my hands and I went like this, and then I walked back to the door, and then I walked around the corner of there was a bathroom, and so we walked around the L-shaped room, and I went like this, and then I turned that light off and turned the other light on, reading lamp on, and I sat back in bed, and she says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "What?" I woke up. I didn't know I was doing that.
Somnambulism,
Yeah.
sleepwalking.
So, and I don't remember ever doing that before. And, well, I said, "Oh, I just had the wildest dream." I said, "What's that?" I said, "Well, at the door, there was a man covered in blood, and he handed me a leg, and I walked over and put it on a pile of legs, and then I came and I did the same thing with an arm." And I was like, "That's just the weirdest thing, you know." So it's like no big deal, you know. So we had breakfast, and it was a great breakfast, and we're going around, and this found out that this bed and breakfast was a hospital.
Field hospital.
And they had on the top floor Union soldiers, and on the ballroom area were Confederate soldiers, and they wouldn't bombard the hospital because they didn't want to shoot their own troops. And so we go down to the basement where we were, and the other couple was staying across from us, and the one room was where the generals were, and because it was in the basement, it was safer. And the other room where the other couple was staying was a morgue. And I asked, "So what was the room we're staying in?" And he says, "Well, that's where they put the body parts, arms and legs and such." And I was like, I just about passed out. And Karen says to the owner of the place, my husband dreamt and did sleepwalking in that room, and he says, "It's happened before."
It's happened before.
It's happened before.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
I think where there's great physical trauma, that there's something goes on.
Going on.
I've heard
yes.
stories of that. People who
And
visited.
I'm not a believer in that kind of stuff, really. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
really not. But that kind of changed
Yeah.
my mind a little.
People who visited Gettysburg, for instance, have
Yeah.
seen
Yeah.
soldiers
Ghosts and things.
and
I've heard
Vicksburg
that. Yeah, I've heard
battlefield.
that.
and-
We need to let people know that we've got a haunted history tour in Hannibal.
We
here.
do.
We
Our-
do.
We'll bring in the folks from the
Very
Haunted History
popular. Yep.
Museum
Very
or
popular.
History
Yep.
Tour here. They also
Yep.
run the Hannibal History Museum, which is a museum that gives you the rest of Hannibal's history,
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
and not necessarily Twain related.
yeah. Our season's just about ready to start. Today is March the 7th,
It is.
2020. And next weekend is our chocolate extravaganza. That's kind of a
Is that
kickoff
next
event.
weekend already?
Yep.
All right.
Yep. Got a comic
Yeah.
convention coming up, and
Oh yeah, comedy on the river.
Comic Con, and a comic book convention coming up,
Right.
and
All kinds of conventions and events going on throughout
girlfriend's
the
getaway
year here, but
weekend.
Great
and-
girlfriends getaway.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
really the first really big event
Yeah, yeah.
of the spring.
A whole bunch of things coming up. So
And one thing we want to remind folks around the world, hopefully this is going out, Hannibal is dry. We had near record flooding last year, maybe even record flooding on the Mississippi River, and that does not get into downtown Hannibal.
Yeah.
We have the flood wall that we mentioned
Yeah.
before, and
And for people who travel, especially from around the world, we should mention that St. Louis, Missouri has an international airport. We're only about 100 miles north of St. Louis along Highway 79, which is Missouri's
Very
first scenic
scenic
byway.
route. Yep.
It's got some beautiful river views coming up that way. So we invite everybody to come and see us.
A lot of curbs and hills, so you want to drive carefully, but it's beautiful scenery. If you don't necessarily want the hills and such, we're an hour and a half or so away from the airport.
Right, right. Yep.
So certainly welcome to come to Hannibal and visit Joe's restaurant,
Yes, please.
Yes, Old Planters.
Old
Right here
Planters.
on Main Street.
And there's history
And
involved with that as
We
well.
should probably mention that we're broadcasting from Java Jive, which is the first
coffee shop west of the Mississippi. Geographically, maybe
Not
not
chronologically.
historically. We're about a block from said river.
Yes.
That's right.
Say goodnight, Gracie.
Good night, Gracie.